In June of 2023, I covered the haunting of the Smurl family. That video did exceptionally well, but years later, having learned much more, I now realize that whatever sources I had at that time all weren't entirely accurate. So with the last Conjuring film, The Conjuring Last Rites, coming out this week, I wanted to revisit this story and dive into the haunting itself, as well as correct some misinformation and give my take on the case itself, as well as how I feel about the Warrens now. So with that being said, like this video, subscribe, and get yourself a drink or a snack, and buckle up, because you're in for a wild ride. The summer of 1972 was merciless in Pennsylvania's Wyoming Valley. The Susquehanna River burst its banks under the wrath of Hurricane Agnes, flooding whole towns and erasing homes. Among those displaced were Jack and Janet Smurl, a hard-working couple. They salvaged what they could and searched for a fresh start in the town of West Pittston, a quiet community known for its coal mining history and tightly packed row houses. By August of 1973, the Smurls had found what seemed like a blessing, a modest two-story duplex at 330 Chase Street. Jack's parents, John and Mary, would occupy one half, while Jack, Janet, and their 4 young daughters settled into the other. The arrangement was ideal. Close family ties under one roof, but with privacy on each side. The home, though weathered, was sturdy and filled with potential. Jack, recently promoted at work, was eager to renovate, and Janet embraced the chance to create a warm household. The Smurls were devout Catholics, their walls quickly filled with crucifixes, rosaries, and the Sacred Heart. By all accounts, they were a model family in a working-class town. But within months of moving in, the house began to resist their presence. It started with nuisances, stains bleeding through freshly painted walls, stubborn discolorations that returned no matter how many coats of paint Jack applied. Tools vanished from the workbench in the basement, only to turn up in odd places days later. Unplugged appliances sparked and smoked as if ignited by an invisible hand. On quiet afternoons, a sickly foul stench crept through rooms, lingering for minutes before dissolving into nothing. The Smurls dismissed these early disturbances as quirks of an old house, or perhaps side effects of flood-damaged wiring. But the house had begun whispering a different story, one that would grow darker with every passing year. By the early 1980s, the strange disturbances had multiplied. Jack's mother, Mary, suffered a heart attack, leaving the family shaken. Financial struggles mounted, despite Jack's earlier promotion. And as the stresses of daily life pressed down, the house seemed to mirror their tension, growing more hostile and unpredictable. It began with voices. Janet heard what she swore was Mary calling her name, only to find Mary sitting silently next door. Mary, in turn, claimed she heard Jack and Janet in heated arguments, screaming, swearing, and shouting at one another. Yet the young couple hadn't uttered a word. Disembodied calls echoed between the duplex walls, sowing confusion and unease. At night, Janet awoke to the sensation of being touched by unseen hands. More than once, she reported the horrifying violation of being sexually assaulted in her sleep by a presence she could neither see nor resist. Jack remained skeptical until his own encounter shook him to the core. One night, he was jolted awake by the sound of a woman whispering. As he turned to speak to Janet, his eyes locked on a shadowy figure crawling up her leg and darting across her body before vanishing. It was no dream. Jack could no longer deny what was happening in their home. Soon, dark masses drifted through hallways, formless, shifting clouds that left behind a sense of dread. Janet began to fear bedtime, knowing that whatever plagued their house was most active at night. The entity escalated from voices and shapes to direct physical assault. Janet recounted being lifted and hurled across the room by invisible hands, crashing into furniture with brutalizing force. The children too began to hear unearthly sounds, blood-curdling screams reverberating through the walls, mingling with low, animalistic grunts that seemed to vibrate in the very air itself. The attacks spread beyond people. Their German shepherd, Simon, was once picked up and thrown into a wall. The children endured sudden shoves, with one even tumbling halfway down the basement stairs. On another night, a ceiling light fixture crashed to the floor, striking their daughter Shannon and splitting her forehead open. And then there were the most intimate horrors. Jack later claimed that he too had been sexually assaulted by an unseen force, dragged, pinned, and violated in ways that he could barely bring himself to describe. He spoke of being attacked while praying, forced to his knees, bruised by blows from nowhere. On one evening, he recounted being assaulted by a succubus-like presence on the living room sofa as a baseball game played on the television. The neighbors noticed as well. Those living nearby sometimes heard terrible screams echoing from the Smurl home, only to discover that no one inside had made a sound. Even when the house was empty, cries and crashes spilled into the night air. Something inhuman had made a claim on 330 Chase Street. For the Smurls, life had become a waking nightmare. The walls of their home were no longer a sanctuary. They were a prison, and the demon within was only growing bolder. In January of 1986, the Smurls reached out to Ed and Lorraine Warren, demonologists from Connecticut. The Warrens were no strangers to the media spotlight. Amityville had already made them famous, but what awaited them in West Pittston, they claimed, was among the most violent hauntings they had ever encountered. On their very first night in the house, Ed invoked the name of Christ, sprinkling holy water and oil around the rooms. The temperature plunged 30 degrees. Objects on a nearby desk began to rattle and fall off. The mattress rose into the air and then slammed back down, and a black, shapeless mass materialized before him, throbbing with malevolence. Lorraine, who was sensitive to spirits, described a cluster of entities throughout the home. An elderly woman, a spirit that was benign but trapped. The presence of a young girl, one that was restless and volatile, and a man who had died within the house. And behind them all, a demon orchestrating the torment, manipulating them like puppets. The Warrens claimed the demon was intelligent, cunning, and powerful. It taunted Ed by scrawling obscenities in smoky, mucus-like script across a mirror. They recorded hours of knocks, bangs, and guttural voices. But no matter how many times Ed commanded it to leave in Christ's name, the entity only grew more violent. For the Smurls, the Warrens' arrival was both a relief and a revelation. At last, outsiders had seen what they had endured. Yet the torment did not cease. The Warrens urged the family to stay strong in faith while they petitioned the Catholic Church for an exorcism. But the demon seemed to relish the challenge. It would not be cast out easily. By summer 1986, the Smurls' private nightmare had become a national spectacle. Reporters swarmed Chase Street. Camera crews camped outside. News anchors spoke of the West Pittston demon. The family appeared on Larry King Live and Entertainment Tonight, their quiet lives shattered under the glare of public fascination. Dozens of journalists crowded their lawn daily, and Janet later lamented that they had hoped for help, but instead received 150 interview requests and people camping outside their home instead. The haunting had gone viral before the word existed in its current context. Neighbors, once sympathetic, grew weary of the constant commotion. Skeptics seized their chance. Paul Kurtz of CSICOP dismissed the case as a hoax, a charade, a ghost story. But the Smurls stood firm. They pointed out that over 30 witnesses had experienced the phenomena. Neighbors, relatives, priests, and still the pounding, the screams, and the assaults continued. As the Warrens documented their findings, the Smurls sought what they believed was the only true weapon against evil, the Catholic Church. Priests were called into the duplex. They blessed the rooms, sprinkled holy water, and prayed over every threshold. The entity responded with mocking laughter, foul stenches, and violent manifestations. 3 separate private exorcisms were attempted by an out-of-state priest, and each failed. The family insisted that the demon slipped between the 2 halves of the duplex. When one side was blessed, it simply fled to the other, waiting until the prayer ceased before returning with greater vengeance. On one family trip in their camper, the demon followed them. Thunderous bangs shook the trailer roof, seemingly reminding them that there was no escape. Neighbors now spoke in hushed tones. Chase Street had become a stage for terror. Some swore they still heard screams. Others avoided eye contact, hoping that the darkness would not contaminate them. Still, the Smurls prayed their rosaries each evening. Statues of saints crowded their shelves. St. Michael the Archangel was invoked nightly. By late October of 1986, Reverend Joseph Adonizio declared that prayers had driven the demon out, and that things were back to normal. The Smurls cautiously agreed, though shadows still lingered at the edges of their nights. Peace was fragile. In 1987, Janet admitted that knocks and fleeting shadows still haunted the duplex, but the family was exhausted. The children deserved normalcy. And so in 1988, after 13 years on Chase Street, the Smurls sold their half of the house and moved to the Wilkes-Barre area. The new residents reported no unusual activity. To skeptics, this was proof that the haunting was a fabrication. But to the faithful, it meant the demon had been bound to the Smurl family themselves and not the building. Either way, 330 Chase Street stood quiet again, ordinary on the outside, infamous in memory. The Smurls closed the door on their nightmare, but their story was far from over. In late 1986, just months after the height of the haunting, journalist Robert Curran, in collaboration with the Smurls and the Warrens, released The Haunted, One Family's Nightmare. The book was marketed as a chilling, first-hand chronicle of what the Smurls had endured. It sold briskly. Readers were captivated by the detailed accounts of invisible assaults, levitations, and demonic taunts. But critics were unforgiving. Reviewers dismissed it as a one-sided and sensational story, accusing Curran of abandoning journalistic integrity. The Wilkes-Barre Times leader called it poorly written and impossible to believe. For the Smurls, the book was not about the fame, it was their testimony. They wanted people to know what had happened, even if the world sneered. But the publication tied their name forever to the haunting. There would be no true escape. In 1991, their ordeal was adapted into a made-for-TV film, The Haunted, produced by 20th Century Fox. The movie aired in prime time, starring Jeffrey DeMunn and Sally Kirkland as Jack and Janet. The script, co-written by Curran, the Warrens, and the Smurls themselves, dramatized the horrors of Chase Street. The levitations, growls, obscenities on mirrors, and the desperate prayers of a family under siege. For millions of viewers across America, the Smurl haunting became more than a headline. It became a cinematic nightmare. The film cemented the Smurls as reluctant figures in paranormal history. Their names were now spoken in the same breath as Amityville, Enfield, and other infamous cases. But with recognition came further skepticism, and the family's desire for privacy deepened. By the late 1980s, the Smurls had settled into a new home. Their life was calmer. The children grew up, and the family healed. The old duplex became someone else's problem. Or perhaps nothing at all. Jack and Janet rarely spoke publicly again, following the media circus. In 2017, Jack Smurl passed away at age 75. His daughter, Karen, shared that he had finally put the nightmare behind him. Inspired by her family's ordeal, Karen occasionally worked as a paranormal investigator, helping others who felt trapped by forces that they couldn't explain. "We had such a hard time and nobody to turn to," she would later say. "He was happy. I was a voice out there for people who needed help," in reference to her father. Today, the house at 330 Chase Street still stands, ordinary on the outside, yet legendary among ghost hunters. No new reports of paranormal activity have surfaced, but the story endures. In the 2020s, renewed interest in the Warrens' case files brought the Smurl haunting back into the spotlight. The producers of the Conjuring franchise announced that their upcoming installment, The Conjuring Last Rites, coming out this year in 2025, would draw heavily from the Smurl case. Once again, it seems, the world will watch a dramatized version of what the family had claimed nearly destroyed them. The Smurl haunting remains one of the most controversial and infamous alleged demonic infestations in American history. Believers cite it as proof of genuine evil, a case where faith alone kept a family alive. Skeptics dismiss it as hysteria, fabrication, or misinterpretation. But for Jack and Janet, for their children and their neighbors, it was not a theory. It was a lived experience. For them, the house on Chase Street was not just a duplex. It was a battlefield where the ordinary collided with the unholy. Now that I've given you a brief overview of the case itself with corrected details, I want to specifically address some of the things I got wrong in my original video to set the story straight, so to speak. I'll do my best to link the two so that people can get more of a first-hand experience feel from the first video, but have the facts from this video as well, if that makes sense. I did speak about an entity seemingly causing the stains to manifest through the paint when the Smurls were renovating. So no matter how many coats of paint they put on, these stains would come through. They also appeared on the floors as well as the walls. That aspect, as far as I've researched, is true, but I do recall saying that Jack was attacked by this entity in my video, and albeit that perhaps could have been true, they could have been one and the same. But at that time, I was extremely worried about YouTube's rules, and I did not want to mention that it sexually assaulted Jack or Janet multiple times. So my apologies there, but I want to be as accurate as I can, and hopefully with this video as a guide, you can get the fullest story alongside watching my original video. With that cleared up, there are also several very interesting questions and points that I'd like to address. People often ask me what my opinion on the Warrens is, and I can tell you now that it's much different than when I made the initial video on the Smurl haunting. Before I share my opinions, I do want to say that I do respect the Warrens for pioneering making a living researching the paranormal, because I do think that their work helped many creators over the years and since be able to do the same. Unfortunately, whether it's been with or without integrity for some. But my opinion is that I think the Warrens perhaps started out with the right intentions, but as years went on, they turned into grifters. They essentially developed a formula on how to create sensationalism surrounding a case, whether the case was supposedly a legitimate haunting or not, in order to profit. As far as I know, the only means they had at making money was from Ed selling his paintings, them selling their books, which would be an example of said formula, and or media appearances in relation with hauntings, and later, movie deals. And as many have said, it didn't necessarily matter if the family profited or not, either, which many of the families did. For example, a family allegedly experiences a haunting. The Warrens find out and get involved, and then they effectively become business partners, publishing books, media kits, etc. together. Thus, whenever they're involved in a case that I cover or learn about, it really makes me question the validity of it. Sadly, just given what we know now, I can't help but feel that way. Now, as for the Smurl case in particular, these are my opinions. I do think it's possible that the family did experience something legitimate, whether that was paranormal, as in a spirit haunting the place, or even as it's been suggested, poltergeist activity manifesting as a result of the teenage girls. It's hard to say there, but considering I've had some very real experiences in my life that I would consider to be extremely dark, if not demonic, it's not entirely out of the realm of possibility that what the Smurls experienced was of a diabolical nature, especially considering the sexual assaults and foul odors, etc. But it seems that with almost every Warren case, it becomes a demonic haunting. Now, it could have been real or it could have been a misinterpretation of other paranormal phenomena, but I do become extra skeptical because of the Warrens' involvement and their formulaic strategy given the other cases they were and would later be involved in. Another thing that makes me skeptical is the fact that the Smurls were devout Catholics. As someone who was raised Catholic myself, I do think as a result of the beliefs that it makes one more susceptible to believing that something could potentially be supernatural. That's not to say that it's not possible for things to be so. I mean, I just covered a family in Taiwan who was non-religious that experienced a rather malicious haunting. But I would argue that there are probably an overwhelming number of cases percentage-wise where those who are the victims or the haunted are of that belief system. Again, not all, and this is not to disparage anybody or their beliefs. It's simply a pattern that I, and I'm sure many others, have recognized. I did also see that Jack Smurl had had brain surgery in 1983 to address memory loss caused by a past case of meningitis, a procedure that some critics and skeptics suggested may have clouded his judgment and could provide an alternative explanation for the paranormal events. However, considering he was not the only member of the family or the only other person to experience the alleged phenomena, I find this detail to be kind of irrelevant. Like perhaps someone was trying to find additional reasons or what have you as to why the family said they experienced what they had. There is much more that can be said on this case and the Warrens as a whole, and I'm lucky to have two friends who are fantastic in their research and just are great people in general that I'd like to shout out as well as urge you to check out because their content dives deep on these very types of questions, especially surrounding the Warrens and other questionable figures. That'd be my friend Stevie over at Truth or Demons podcast, who sent me some great resources during my rehashed research for this video, and my good friend Florio over at Florio's Phantom Files. Definitely check them out, subscribe, and learn something new, because you definitely will. I know this one was a revisited case, but it certainly, at least at the moment, is a pretty relevant one to revisit, if I don't say so myself. And I've been itching to correct some information that I got wrong for a good while, so the opportunity just seemed right. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, subscribe if you're new here, and let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you have a case you'd like to see covered, or one that I've already covered revisited, then definitely let me know down below. And consider becoming a channel member to watch my content ad-free and enjoy the other perks by clicking join here on YouTube or by joining over at patreon.com/mysteryarchives. You can also grab yourself something cool to help support the channel at mysteryarchives.myshopify.com, which is my official store that I run myself. And with all that being said, as always, I'm grateful for each and every one of you, and I appreciate you taking the time. This has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Remember to please stay safe out there, from grifters and demons and much more. And take care. I'll see you next time.